ACORN, a local group advocating for tenants' rights, is doubling down on its demand for an anti-renoviction bylaw. Tonight, they're holding a rally to show councillors they will keep showing up until the city takes action.
Well, with renoviction, I mean, there is that legal process where a landlord can make an application called an N-13, it's referenced as, with the tribunal, and then provide that criteria, we'll say, to say that it's, a necessary renoviction that the tenants need to leave for. Unfortunately, landlords can make up a lot of information that's not necessarily true. The tribunal itself doesn't follow up with and authenticate the application. It's to ensure that it's truthful. Landlords are motivated by money and profit, and so they will do anything to get an old tenant out and be able to collect more rent. Sometimes renovations can only be mean just a paint job, and that's enough. Just as long as soon as the tenant's out, they move up the rent, like maybe about 35% seems to be the average. What amazes me actually with my experience with Acorn is how many tenants don't know their rights. And I mean, there's also landlords out there that will harass and bully tenants, saying that they have to get out, or they'll dangle the carrot and say, I'll give you cash for keys. And unfortunately, again, that's just ways to get them out the door. It's very frustrating that landlords use those tactics uh, just in the name of profit. When we're talking about people's lives, especially long term tenants, people on fixed incomes, they have a very difficult time finding something in today's market, especially that what they were paying at a place that a landlord wants to charge that extra 35% a month. Prominently, I find that most renovictions are done to long-term tenants, and with a long-term tenant, they've become stable in that neighborhood, and they're familiar and comfortable in that neighborhood. That's their home. Tenants are scrambling to find a place to live, even with that little bit of money that the landlord provided them. There's people that get stuck once they do move out and they're paying that high rent. I mean, most of the time, majority of the cases, they become homeless. I'm aware of an older man that lived in a building for, I believe, just over 20 years, and he couldn't find a place to live on Canada pension, unfortunately. So fixed income, income for that matter. From my understanding, the last year, if not longer, it was before the bylaw came in place. He lives in a tent. He's homeless. It's so sad to see that what we're doing, just kicking people out in the streets, families, seniors, people with disabilities that don't have that resource available to them, that protection, I'll say, under the Residential Tenancy Act to ensure that they keep a roof over their head, an affordable roof over their head. First of all, Ford's not addressing anything on social issues, especially affordable housing. With the Residential Tenancy Act, which is what the tribunal basically is their guide on how they enforce the rules and protections for landlords and tenants. It doesn't have a clear process to establish a tenant to reoccupy the rental unit. A term that we're familiar with, but many are not, is right for first refusal, which means the opportunity once the renovation is completed for a tenant to come back at the same rent. That's actually under the RTA, but again, the a lot of tenants, they get stuck in that higher rent or become homeless, and it's just shameful that Ford won't do his job. And this is why municipalities have been very key in introducing this rent eviction bylaw to protect the tenants in that area. And it's creating that effect where municipalities, I know from speaking with city councilors, that they're going to start talking with those partnered municipalities and address the provincial government, because it should not be falling on the municipalities' back. But at the same time, we're so grateful that that protection is in place until Ford does address it. I guess the right of first refusal is a little confusing in the wording, meaning that they're allowed to come back after the renovations. They're thinking refusal. Well, that means, yeah, I'm saying no, I don't want to come back. And there's that misunderstanding and miscommunication. I find also too landlords, like I said earlier as well, landlords say, "Oh well, I lost contact with the tenant, so they must have just moved on and took the money that I gave them." And so I've rented it out to a new tenant now, so I can't evict them, but of course, that new tenant's paying like easily probably 700, 800, up maybe even $1,000 more a month. With this new bylaw in place, there's education, awareness, and proper guidelines that landlords have to abide by to ensure the tenant does come back after the renovation and at the same rent that they were paying before the renovation. The landlord, unfortunately, too, ultimately, they're businessmen or people, I shall say. The landlord, in the cost of doing business, they would rather pay the fine rather than bringing an old tenant back and collecting less rent. It's all in the name of profit. Also, with N13s, it just amazes me with the tribunal. Even though it's actually the landlord's responsibility to provide all the particulars, it's very minimal actual productions that they require, and the tribunal doesn't necessarily question it or validate it. And it turns out then that the tenant is the one that's scouring around, being that private detective and building up their own case to get their unit back or to have the landlord found guilty in the tribunal, so to speak. It's rare actually if the tribunal will fine landlords. And even out of those fines, the landlords don't pay them. It's sad that we've got so much greed out there, and it's supported by our government and our provincial government at least. Like I said, we're grateful that the municipalities are starting to see too many landlords were using renovictions as an excuse to get rid of old tenants. And so the municipality stepped in to protect them. And we're hoping that the other municipalities that are coming into play will, adopt the bylaw, similar bylaw, especially with Toronto has moving costs, etc. That maybe the province may recognize eventually down the road that look, this is a growing trend, and you need to protect affordable housing. Acorn, I mean, is prominently throughout Southern Ontario. If it weren't for Hamilton, actually, Toronto would maybe we still be fighting for it. And then once Toronto opened that door as well, that second door, other people started to consider it. We've got renoviction bylaw in London, and now it's being proposed in Kitchener, Waterloo, Mississauga, now Guelph, obviously, and Ottawa. And it's just building momentum. We've shown studies where landlords, the renovictions had increased in by 300% since 2017. I cringe sometimes actually when Trudeau used to say you should only be paying 33% of your income on rent. I'm like, where do you find those places? So again, the landlord being, motivated by the profit, he's going to make any excuse possible to get that tenant out. That older tenant, majority of the times, either becomes homeless or goes from place to place until uh, I don't know even what the solutions are to move in with families and things like that. I mean, sometimes some people don't have families, so it's really scary out there. We need safe, healthy homes, and we're fighting for that. But at the same time, too, we find homes, we build a community around ourselves and feel comfortable and safe. And in the name of profit, it's taking under us like a rug being pulled from under us. They need to pass this bylaw. It's a momentum that's building all across Ontario. As the municipalities grow with this renoviction bylaw, it's power in numbers, just like ACORN, and that potentially, hopefully, Doug Ford will listen finally and do something. He's he acts just like a corporate landlord. So